Let's prepare the box now. This box has, we're using the lid as the bottom, and this is going to be the top. So we're going to mount the pie to the bottom, and instead of centering it, I'm going to move it over to the left, because see this connector? That's going to go, this is the camera cable. The shiny connectors go down. So it's going to go in here. So if you centered it, it would kind of be pushed up against the edge. So we're going to shift this over. Just leave about 1/4 of an inch there and flush to the edge here. So we'll have a lot of room for the cable to go in here, and it'll bend around here. And then we're going to make a hole in this case and mount this below it. Okay, so I'm going to use my handy dandy measure, caliper. We said 1/4 of an inch, which is 0.25. Doesn't really have to be that exact, but okay. So there you are. And I'm going to hold it flush against the lip, and I'm going to mark it. I can use my X-Acto. I'm just going to scratch and I can see now my marks. And these are, I'm using metric screws, which are 2.5 millimeter. So I like to make my hole slightly bigger just to give me a little slop in case my measurement was slightly off. So I'm going to get a drill now and drill these 4 holes and be back in a minute. Okay, I've drilled my 4 holes. And I have my 4 M2.5. Those are metric. And you notice I'm going back and forth between English and metric. Someday we'll all be metric here in the U.S. But so I realize we need to get used to both to help us transition to pure metric. Metric's a lot nicer. But anyway, let's continue. Okay, so I have my 4 holes, and they line up pretty well. You notice there's a lip here. And the problem with the lip is if you make this board flush, these connectors, the USB, let's see. Oh, there's a little, this is sticking out a little too. So anyway, this lip might get in the way of the connectors, so that's where this tubing comes in. What you want to do is make spacers out of it. You could use washers, but for some reason I like these because they're a little compressible, so if they're not perfectly the same, and you can screw it down and tighten it. Also, the compression then gives a nice lock to it. So you want to cut them the same height and about 3 millimeters. And I have my handy dandy vernier caliper, and so that's 4.5, so a little less than that. Well, actually, let's see how 4.5 looks. Yeah, you want a 3. Okay, so let's try that again. So this looks like 3. Wow, 3.02. So they're really short, so make 4 of them. These are going to be, I'll call them compressible standoffs, because it's standing the board off the, standing the circuit board off the base. Okay, so now we got 4. So you want to put the bolt through the bottom and the standoff. You want to do that 4 times. And I'll show you another trick. As you are starting to notice, I love blue tape. Let me show you another use for it. Because usually when you turn them over, they fall out. So as I put them on, Good, so now when I turn them over, they don't fall over. Put the 4 spacers on. Now, you can put the circuit board on. Great. And see the clearance now? It's sitting above the lip. That's great. Okay. Now I'm not going to screw it down yet because it turns out putting the camera on, it's easier if you do it before you bolt it down. And before we can do the camera, we have to take off the lens, which is another process. Okay, so we got this part done. And now the top side of the board. Let's see, this thing is 100 millimeters. And so we want a quarter of that, which is 25. That happens to be an inch. And what I'm going to do is just scrape a line, and we want to center it so it's about 60, so 30. Actually, let me measure that better. Oh yeah, 60. Okay, so 30. And what I like about this is they're sharp, so I just lean the edge and I score it. And if you want to make sure, score from the other, and they should line up. Good. That's the center. And you notice this offset? The reason I'm not putting it in the center is 2 reasons. One is when we mount this underneath, you got this connector, and so you want it to gracefully turn the corner. And we got a lot of cable too, and it's going to plug in to this part, which is cool because then you can have the box open, and then when you want to close it, just tuck the cable in. Okay, so it gives you room for the cable. Plus, what's going to happen is this is where your image sensor is going to be. You're going to have the laser up here. This hinge is going to go here, hot glued down, so that when you want to load a specimen, I'm going to tape it temporarily. More blue tape. Yahoo! Let me just tape this just to mock it up for you. Alright, so we got the cap that's centered here, and then we got the hinge, which goes like that. And so the hinge, we're going to hot glue it both to the cap and to the base, so you can flip it up, put some sample in there, and flip it back down. And then the wire we had here, we're going to run it along the hinge, along the side of the hinge, and in a hole through here, which will then hot glue so no water will get into it. And then it will go to the circuit board to get power from the Pi. Okay, so we need to drill a hole in here. I'm drilling this hole in my vise, which is over there, but since I have the camera here, I just thought you want to hold this in a vise. You don't want to drill things like this. I'm just doing this, holding this to show you how it goes. I'll just do a little tiny bit. What the step does is every time you push it, it keeps on increasing the size of the hole. Again, do this in a vise. I just did it by hand just to show you. But hold it in a vise and you keep on going. And this last rung is 3/4 of an inch, which is how big you want the hole. Just drilled the hole, and I noticed there's a little bit of burrs, and I always like to get rid of burrs. So just take your X-Acto and run it like at a 45-degree angle all around the perimeter. And that'll cut off all the burrs. There. Okay, that's a nice hole. Okay. Okay, well, you should do that in a vise, and you should do it when you drill the hole, not after you assemble the whole thing, but sorry about that. But at least you got to see how I Dremel. And now you got all this burr, and it's nice to clean that up with a file, but I'm just doing this quick and dirty. Cut away so you don't cut your fingers or hand. I'm just getting rid of the burrs. Cut this way, okay. All right, well, that was crude and dirty, but lo and behold, I think I should cut a little more off that side. To make the sample holder, we have this PVC cardstock. This is what they make credit cards out of. It's 0.8 millimeter thick, and I cut it in fourths and punched a 3/4 hole in it. And this is, now I'm going to use tweezers. This is the one thing you have to keep really clean. Actually, there are two things you have to keep really clean. This glass, which is a cover slide for microscopes, these are 1-inch diameter and really thin, pretty fragile. You want to keep the bottom clean because it's going to be on the image sensor, and you want the image sensor to be clean. Okay, so this is the cardstock. It looks like it has a tiny bit of burr, and as you know by now, I don't like burrs, so we're just going to take the blade at a 45-degree angle and deburr both sides. Now, the imaging happens in the middle of this, not at the perimeter, so, but actually you want the glass to lay down flat, so that's a good reason why you want to deburr it. Okay, now the surface is nice and flat. Now, when I mark these, there's a little circle mark, so I'm going to make the pretty side up. Okay, so what we want to do is on the bottom, we're going to put a layer of silicone sealer, that's this stuff, and then we're going to take our tweezers and drop the glass on top. Now when you drop the glass, make sure all the perimeter is overlapping the plastic. If you're off considerably and you try and push it, you're going to smear that silicone everywhere, and you don't want that in the center where all the imaging is going to happen. So here's how I do it. And oh, by the way, have some, these are is a little wooden dowel, and I like to cut it on a 45-degree angle, so I have a tip. And I got some paper because and gloves because this stuff is a little messy, and I got some paper to put some on. So let's open this up. I put a screw in to keep it so it pulls the channel, it keeps the channel open for it to flow. I'm just going to put a little down so I can close this up. There's some silicone sealer. You can smell the acetic acid, which is the curing agent. So I'm going to take some, stick this, take some of this, and this is the bottom side, so I'm going to come through and I'm going to just distribute it, oopsie, along the perimeter. Maybe this way. And a little more. Yep. So ideally you want a thin layer, which I'm not doing the best of jobs, but a thin layer. Let me get the excess off. And I'm gonna, you don't want too much in the, you don't want any coming out on the other side like I got here, hence the paper towel. Okay. Alright, so hopefully you do a better job than I did, but okay, now I'm going to pick up this glass. Now this is the careful step. So you want to drop it so it's centered. And now I'm going to take the cotton part and just press it. I'm going to put it on my, I got this little box here I'm going to lay down. And now what you want to do, I'm going to cut this so I have stick with no glue on it. So this is pristine. You never want to get glue in the center. I'm going to push down on the perimeter lightly, because this is really thin glass, just to make sure all of the glue, so you'll have a continuous bead of glue. So be careful. If you push too hard, you're going to break it. And I notice I'm going to have to move it slightly over because my thing isn't centered. But you see I'm dragging this glue. If that were in the middle, it would ruin your image. So just, if it's sneaking out a little on the perimeter, that's okay. But the center 4mm square has to be pristine. Okay, I can see that all the glue is on all the edges. So now this is a hermetic seal. It'll prevent water from coming in. I'm just gonna. Okay, so you can see that. This takes a day to dry, so do this the last thing before you close up shop, and then set it aside to dry in a safe place. Okay, so now it's dry, and I noticed I was pretty sloppy, so this is the bottom, this is the top. Some of the glue came through. I'm going to use my X-Acto and just carefully scrape it off. Okay, cool. So now you notice the glass is slightly lower than this plastic, and that creates a well for when you put your sample water in there. It can stay in that well. So that's kind of handy. Again, we're only going to be imaging, this diameter is what, 3/4 of an inch? We're only going to be imaging about 3x4 millimeters, so just the center. Okay, so next thing is we want to glue this from underneath against here. And I just noticed that's okay. It's a little, these posts are in the way. You want it flat, so I'm just going to cut the corners of this. Now be careful, if you bend this, you're going to bend the glass, and glass does not like to bend. It's going to crack. So it would probably have been better to have done this before I mounted the glass, but I'm being careful. But yeah, it's really easy to break this glass, so be careful. So now I just trimmed it because there are these posts that are there. Now remember, cleanliness is important, so I'm going to put this and clean this out. Okay. And so what I want to do is take my glass. The good side is going to go down first. So what I'm going to do is put silicone sealer around here. Then I'm going to drop this and push it down. Okay, back to the silicone sealer. I'm just going to do it right out of the tube. So get my silicone sealer, make sure there's no dust on it, and now you want this watertight too, so you want to put it all around. Okay. Okay, I'm going to put the top back on. And now I'm going to use my stick to first clean off the perimeter. And it looks pretty uniform. That's good. Okay, and I'm going to make sure it gets on the sides too. Alright, so now I got silicone all around it. And now, let me put a little, I don't want to get my cardboard dirty. Okay, so now I'm going to drop this carefully. I'll actually use my tweezers. Get all the gunk out. I'm going to drop this so it centers. And voila. And now I'm going to push carefully, evenly. I can see now the glue is squishing out because I put a lot. So I'm not going to squeeze too hard where the glue is oozing too much, because I don't want it to start migrating towards the center. But that worked pretty well. Okay, I'm just pushing down all the corners, make sure it's watertight. And that's it. Let this dry for a day.